So we come away from the business world and we now move back into our local communities and more people with hands-on experience as we look at how sport can be a trigger for activating social change in local communities and what can be done, how it can be done, how we can make it more effective. We've got a collection of terrific people to speak to, but I'll leave you in far more capable hands than mine to interact with them. Margaret Heffernan is... well, there's many things she is, probably more things she isn't. She's just an incredible person all round, an author, she's a chief executive, she's been involved in television, she's an entrepreneur, she's a speaker, she's a hugely successful person on so many fronts. Most importantly today, she's a guest and facilitator at Beyond Sport. It gives me great pleasure to welcome up Margaret Heffernan.
Great. Thanks so much. Thanks for including me in this. I've never been to a Beyond Sports Summit before, but I have a sneaking suspicion I'm going to come to more. I've written a lot about sport, some of it rather depressing, and some of it, I hope, rather inspiring. Maybe one of the most inspiring people I've ever had the occasion to talk to about sport was Travis Tygart, who runs the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency. He commissioned a gigantic piece of research. He was so distressed by many of the things that have happened in the sporting world recently. And he really wanted to know what was it that people loved about sport. And what he discovered was, I suspect, what most people in this room know, that what people really love about sport is that it teaches such profound lessons around discipline, endurance, generosity, and fair play. Lessons that it can teach and that the world badly, badly needs to learn. But with all the sort of opportunities there are, certainly all the challenges there are, I think one of the crucial questions I always hear people asking is, yeah, but where do you start? Do you start locally or do you start globally? Where are the maximal intervention points? Should you start small and grow big, or do you start big because the challenges are big? How do you know where to start and where to make the most impact? And that's really the theme for the two panels this afternoon. Our first panel is really looking at the impact that sport can have literally on the streets. And I'm happy to introduce the contributors to that today. Our first contributor is Mark Connolly. He's the UNICEF representative in Jamaica and will have extraordinary things to say about the setting in which he's doing his work and some creative ideas about how that work operates. Our second contributor was trying on Lord Ashdown's badge earlier, hoping that that alone would mean that people treated him like a peer of the realm. But I suspect at some point he might be one. Please welcome Louis Faith from Pompey and the community in Portsmouth. Standing in, fortunately, for one of our panelists who had to drop out is Joanne Pasternack. Joanne is VP of San Francisco's 49ers Foundation in the United States. And last but not least, I'm happy to welcome Chris Tooley, the CEO of Lycamobile, who is working at street level but on a global business. These are our panelists today. Please give them a warm welcome. Thank you very much. Mark, I'd really like to start with you, if I may. If you could paint a picture of some of the really exceptional challenges that you face in Jamaica and some of the really, I think, creative solutions that you found to address some of those.
Thank you. Well, for starters, Kingstown is not London town, completely different. And since we've been in this hotel for 2 or 3 days now, whatever image you have of Jamaica is not the one I'm going to talk about, not the postcard, not Montego Bay. To paint the picture, I will quote 3 Jamaicans. First one, Shelly Ann Fraser-Price. Many of you know, the fastest woman in the world since 2008. And UNICEF Jamaica's one and only UNICEF ambassador. What does Shelly Ann say about Jamaica? Sport is larger than life in Jamaica. Everyone who follows sports knows that. Jamaicans in music, sport, and cannabis punch way above their weight on the world market. And sport is the first on that list. But if Damian Marley was here, and believe me, listening to this music, I wish Damian Marley was here, we would hear Damian Marley sing his song, Welcome to Jamrock, which begins with the line, out on the streets, they call it murder, followed by Welcome to Jamrock, followed by poor people life have no value. That's the Jamaica we work in. And last but not least, for those of you who follow literature, Jamaican won the first ever Man Booker Prize Award. And if Marlon was here, he would just say the title of his book, A Brief History of 7 Killings. What is that book about? If you haven't read the 700-page Man Booker Prize winner, Marlon James, it's about 7 assassinations that took place around the assassination attempt of Bob Marley 39 years ago. So the Jamaica I'm talking about is endemic violence, epidemic homicide, and in which growing up in Jamaica any time in the past 40 years, just staying alive is a huge challenge. So we're up against violence, we're up against homicide, and what we're doing in Jamaica with partners like Fight for Peace, like Coaches Across Continents, is going through the education system to strengthen sports programs to reduce violence.
But you've done something really clever in terms of, because it strikes me that a lot of programs are sort of outside of school, or they don't really connect with the community. And what we were talking about earlier, I think, was really clever in terms of how you managed to connect education and sport without sport getting the kind of deadly reputation of school, right? So can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I think it will probably offer a lot of food for thought for people here.
I'll keep it simple because it is simple. Schools in Jamaica are violent. What in the British colonial system was called corporal punishment is practiced everywhere, and it's violent discipline. It's no longer a pedagogical thing in which somehow hitting someone will improve their performance. Science shows it doesn't work. So we have violent disciplines in school. Kids fear school. Kids get beaten daily in school. So what we've done is to try and analyze the situation, decrease violence in school, and the simple answer is find those young people who are no longer in school, train them as coaches. In fact, look for those athletes in their 17, 18, 19-year-olds who are hanging around. Get them into the coaching discipline, get them back in the school, not as the PE teacher, but as what we call it edu sport, to get them back in the back of the classroom. They are the ones who will take the kids out for recess, for phys ed, and for after-school sports, but they'll be in the classroom, hearing the dialogue about arithmetic, hearing the discussion about the history, and they'll keep that conversation going in the playing fields. They'll also keep an eye on the teachers, so the teachers aren't hitting kids anymore. Therefore, what we get as results are decreased violence in schools, increased attendance on Fridays, because every parent has to decide on Friday, do I keep a little money for the weekend or do I send my kid to school? If there's sports on Fridays, they go to school. And we're getting some increased performance in grades. But the bottom line is we aim to reduce the violence in the schools. And as the principals say, where this works, they just say, it's perfect. The kids burn off the energy, much less tension. They're much more willing to learn when they've had that attention from the coach.
Have you been able to measure the impact of any of these programs?
We have, and it was during the Commonwealth Games last year when we gathered all the principals from the schools. And as I say, much to our surprise, the discipline went down in every school. And
you mean bad discipline? Or discipline?
Violent discipline.
Right. Okay.
Violent discipline. Jamaican schools every school has a dean of discipline. Me as an American, that was a new concept. You have an academic dean and a discipline dean, which I think can only guarantee bad results if someone's always there disciplining. But the bottom line is deans of disciplines reported very few visits on days when edu sports took place. And as I say, attendance went through the roof on Fridays. That was probably the biggest result because Friday was a low attendance day. Most kids didn't go to school on Friday. And our goal was never to increase academic performance, but again, we're seeing that going up.
Fine. Well, of course, kids learn better when they're not terrified, don't
yes.
they? Right. Okay, brilliant. Joanne, does what you're hearing from Mark resonate in terms of the kinds of things that you're doing, that you're thinking about some of the issues you're confronting in San Francisco?
We're on a peninsula, not an island, but it does sometimes feel like its own microcosm. At the San Francisco 49ers, we're very focused on our mission, which is to keep kids safe, on track, and in school. And within that, we're looking to bridge the socioeconomic divide that exists in San Francisco. We have a street that runs through called Highway 101. On one side of Highway 101 is some of the wealthiest real estate, the most expensive real estate in all of the U.S. The average home price is about $4 million. On the other side of 101, you have apartment buildings stacked on top of apartment buildings where there's gang violence, where you have 10 to 12 people living in a one-bedroom or an efficiency studio apartment, and the children don't have the role models that they can look up to who can provide them with that path towards the other side of 101. So one of the things we do at the San Francisco 49ers is we work to bridge that. We work to show the children the possibilities. One of my favorite quotes is one I heard from a U.S. soccer star, and she said, if you can see her, you can be her. Mm-hmm. And I think about that all the time. How can we help the children living on one side of 101 see the folks living on the other side of 101? So we create a lot of programming where we're bringing those two together. We also use sport as a way to draw the children in. One example of a program that's been very successful is it's called Fresh Lifelines for Youth. We work with children who are incarcerated or who have been threatened with incarceration to help them see the possibilities. So when a child has been told that they are now in a disciplinary state, they're being sent to juvenile hall or threatened with incarceration, they believe that that is how they are now defined. FLY, as we call it, FLY comes in and says that is not how you are defined. You have a chance to redefine yourself, and sets them up with mentors who have been in a similar situation but have had a chance to rebuild themselves. We bring our 49ers players, superstars to these young people, into juvenile hall. We look for the players who have a background of either having had a parent or having themselves been in trouble at some point, and we have them share their stories of resiliency, of optimism, and of how to make a mistake and recover from it. We were just there actually 2 weeks ago in juvenile hall. One of our players, whose mother was incarcerated when he was growing up, shared his story of how he knew that he had a different path. He had a different opportunity. And although his story wasn't any different than the stories that so many other people might have in our community, the fact that he is a member of the San Francisco 49ers, the fact that he scored a touchdown the prior Sunday, the fact that he's somebody they look up to, that resonated with them. They stopped, they listened, and they learned. And we think that is really important. It's an opportunity for us to use a very public platform to inspire change in young people.
And do you find that your players are keen to take part in this? Do you have to kind of kidnap them to find the time to do it?
We are very blessed. We really are. It's part of our culture at the 49ers, but I believe it's part of the culture of all of our professional sports teams to understand what it means to be a role model. And in the NFL, there is no contractual obligation for the players to go out and do community service, but each of the last 4 years, 100% of our players have gone out and done one or more community event. Mm-hmm. Some guys show up every week. I asked this one particular player a couple years ago who literally did not miss a week. I said, what is it that brings you out on your one day off a week to come out into the community with us? And he gave me two answers. He said, number one, if I'm not out with you, I'm probably sitting on the sofa playing video games. He is a grown up, but he's 24 years old, so he's playing video games. He said, number two, when I go out there, I remember the obligation, the opportunity I have as somebody who has a public platform to do something really good with my few years I'll be here in the NFL. So we continuously try to remind them of that, and even when they come in as rookie players, their first year in the league, we have a player development program that's really well structured where we spend time with each of the guys, we get to know them, and my team and I help them develop what we call their philanthropic platforms. What that does is it helps them tie it back to something that they're passionate about, whether it's that their mother has diabetes, they lost a brother to gang violence, they believe in literacy because one of my players, his mom's a librarian, and he just loves to, one of the biggest guys in the team, and he likes to sit in the little kindergarten-style chairs and read books to kids. But we help them to feel a sense of ownership for the philanthropic platform that they're out to share with the youth. And then literally when we have an event coming up, I'll approach them, or one of my team members will approach them with that message. Hey, Joe, we have an event at a kindergarten next week. We know how much your philanthropic platform related to literacy means to you. Come join us. So it becomes part of their story. Mm-hmm. And I always say to them, now you have something to share when you're at that cocktail party or you're at that community event and somebody says to you, what do you stand for? You could say, I stand for literacy. And then what we do on the flip side in order to show our appreciation is when there are opportunities for them to get visibility for their philanthropic work, we go out and find that for them. The player I use as the example with literacy, with the mother who's a librarian, we nominated him for a National Scholastic, which is a in-school book program, National Scholastic Award, which he won. And he wears that as proudly as he does his Pro Bowl title. And it makes a difference. We also, as silly as it sounds, in a world of text messages and instant communications, my team and I handwrite notes to thank the players and the kids, and we ask the schools we go to have the kids write the notes as well. And you'll see if you go into the locker room, the guys have those hanging up in their lockers because they mean something to them. And it reminds them again that these are young people whose lives they have an opportunity to influence and that we appreciate that they're doing it. And I think you can't say thank you enough.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I think actually the more digital communication there is, the more those handwritten notes mean, right?
Exactly.
Because they have scarcity value.
The way I get the guys to remember the day after a game, our day off is Monday.
Is you text them.
They play their games on Sunday. Sunday night after the game,
Right.
we're texting, remember, 9 a.m., parking lot, van will be there. We always have some sort of food item because these are big guys and they like to eat all the time. So I make sure I have food and then hopefully some treats after. But, you know, just like I always say, I'm a mom to 2 at home, but I'm a mom to 60 at the office. And that goes along with I always have snacks for my kids in the car. I have snacks for my guys in the van.
Right.
So
well, they're bigger than you, right?
They are a little bit bigger than me.
Brilliant. Louis, you've heard about what other people are doing, but you're actually doing it. I wonder if you could talk a little bit both about how you've been a recipient of sports in the community, but also then what you've been doing yourself.
Okay, so when I was 14, I joined a sports program called the Kicks program. For around 4 years, I was active in football and boxing, well over 1,000 contact hours into sport. And when I left school, I realised that that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to give back just like the Kicks staff done to me. And I started to begin my journey through sport, FA level 1s, level 2s, apprenticeships and active leadership and youth work. And after sort of 3 years into becoming a sports young ambassador, I sort of excelled really quickly and realised that it wasn't just about sport, and it was about making sure that young people enjoy sport in the right way, not just the competitive side, but the enjoyment and all the values that come with it, like respect and fair play and teamwork. And for me, just sort of giving that back, like the way I got given it, is what I wanted to sort of achieve to. Yeah.
What do you think, I mean, when you first started taking part in Pompey in the community, what do you think it protected you from?
I mean, at the age of 14, me and my peer group, we were very much involved with most of the antisocial behaviour and crime that was going on within the area of the southeast of Portsmouth. We were drug taking, very low Class C drugs, for around 4 years. And when I got involved with the Kicks program, because we hang around in the park, and the Barclay Space for Sport program developed the site, 2 AstroTurfs, 2 basketball courts, 4 tennis courts, and it was like a new lease of life for me and my friends. So it was the sports side that pulled us away from the drug taking, the drug selling, and committing the antisocial behaviour. And the only reason we committed antisocial behaviour because we was high on drugs.
And in your experience, both in taking part in those programs and now running some of those programs, is there a particular moment in a kid's life where it has more impact than others?
Definitely. Sort of, for me, anyone from the age of sort of 18 to 21, sort of my age group in Portsmouth, I see a lot of young people sort of still in that mindset where they're selling drugs because why would I go to work for £50 a day when I can go and earn £500 a day sitting around selling drugs? So I think that's the barrier where they can't get out of that mindset of earning a lot of money, doing less, earning a lot. Why would they do a lot and earn less? I think that's the barrier between them actually becoming something else.
And I think one of the things that's really interesting when we were talking earlier is you talked about being a participant in one of the programs, and then you started creating a lot of the programs, and the programs you've created have been really successful. And what's so beautiful about that model, of course, is that makes it infinitely sustainable on a human level, right? Because your programs are creating the people who are going to create the next programs, right? what's the biggest obstacle you face? Because in theory, that's a perfect model. It could go on forever.
My biggest obstacle is sustainability. I mean, a lot of people in this room will know funding only lasts for 2, maybe 3 years at most. And I think the only barrier between sort of the grassroots level and sort of making it, well, sustaining it, is the funding. And I believe that funding, you know, with how big sport is and how much influence it can have, I believe that funding needs to be increased for a longer period of time. Now, a lot of people with organisations in this room will apply for funding for 3 years and then reapply for funding for another 3 years. Why can't you just apply for funding for 6 years and have higher targets and higher demands? Because you're still going to do the work within 6 years, but you have to apply twice for funding. I believe that funding needs to be extended longer, greater funding, so people can do more work for longer times and you can see the impact.
Right. Louis being way too modest here, because the first program he created and ran called Youth Choose, I think your goal, you were told you had to touch 150 kids, and Louis touched 500 instead.
Yeah, 500, yeah.
So, you know, the notion that that's infinitely sustainable is pretty appealing. Mm. So, I want to turn to you, Chris, because, of course, the sort of work that Louis is doing is kind of exactly the street level on which you like to get involved, isn't it? What is the connection between what your business does and how it operates, and how you like to interact with sports and kids' appetites for sports?
Well, first of all, it's fantastic to hear such inspirational stories, but also some quite frightening stories as well, coming out of tough urban environments. Lycamobile also comes from a tough urban environment. We're an international mobile operator who we sell principally our product to immigrants and ethnic groups, sometimes tourists, but by far and away the first two sectors. They're among the most underprivileged people in society. Poor socioeconomic, often just arrived in the country, not only in the UK, we're in 20 countries, so we've got experience of people living in tough conditions in 20 countries. And the reason they buy our products is because we offer them a low-cost means of communicating home, and that's an incredibly valuable lifeline. So we as a company have looked into what can we give back, not just out of a sense of giving, but to be frank, out of a sense of enlightened self-interest at the same time. Many companies have looked at the CSR story and said, we don't want to give something for the sake of it, we want to give something that is both beneficial and reflects on us. Mm-hmm. And that's what we've tried to do. And when you look at where our customers, our end users come from, we represent over 100 nationalities in the UK alone. The vast majority live in the major cities of England, Wales and Scotland. And we've therefore looked to see, well, how can we put something back in? And you asked the question at the start, do you look at this globally as a corporate, or do you look at this locally? And the answer with Lycamobile is that we look at it locally. We have a mantra where we say we wish to win the battle of the street corner. And the street corners of the UK today, we're talking about the corner shops, in the East End of London, in Peckham in South London, in Sparkbrook in Birmingham, in Merseyside, in West Leeds. These are areas actually where 30, 40, 50 years ago you'd see sport being played on the street, whether it was soccer or cricket, and the same thing I should have said soccer for football, but the same sort of thing you'd see in the States. Those actual sports have left the streets now, and the sad thing is that in this country and in many other countries, government's not supported sport in schools to the same extent that most people would like to see, and that includes immigrant communities as well. Therefore, it's become beholden upon private initiatives or government offshoot initiatives to actually support the growth of youth sport. And by and large, it's done a fantastic job. A lot of sport now is sustained by parents in particular, also by teachers volunteering, and by sports clubs in the community. We've heard of the 49ers. We do a lot of work with West Ham United, who have a fantastic program for West Ham in the community. And we support that through something called the Lycamobile Cup, which brings a schools competition into over 100 schools take part in East London, and the final of the match is played at Upton Park. And from next year, the final of the match will be played at the Olympic Stadium. So that's a fantastic incentive for kids who who are getting less sport at school than they should do, in the opinion of many, and that initiatives are being brought in. So if we as a sponsor can get involved in that and support it and fund it, we're more than happy to do so. We do the same thing in cricket, where we support something called Chance to Shine Street. Chance to Shine is a 10-year-old initiative that actually was originally supported through Mervyn King and Gordon Brown, and subsequently been taken up by subsequent governments, but also attracts a lot of private funding going into it as well. And we sponsor the urban initiative in it called Chance to Shine Street. And this year alone, over 10,000 kids have been exposed to a fantastically exciting form of street cricket from which they can learn skills, develop skills, and so on. And it takes them out of the cycle of the non-sporting life that Louis was referring to there, and gives them something exciting and interesting and diverting to participate in. And the feedback we get is extremely positive, and the resonance that it has with our brand is that we're able to put something back into the communities that have given us so much.
Right. Now, the criticism of the kind of grassroots work that you've all described so eloquently is, well, this is great, but it's all small. So I guess my question or challenge to you is, how do you scale it? I mean, are we looking at a future which is millions of projects like this, or is there some way to get more out of them than just what the projects themselves can deliver? Mark, do you have a view on that?
I do. I think as we all know, and we've heard throughout the 3 days here, what you measure is what matters. And you've got to pick those outcomes or indicators, not that you're sure you're going to reach, but that actually means something. So in our EduSports things, there isn't a principal on the island who would like to see decreased violence on campus and increased attendance. Those are national standards. They'll get rewarded for them. They will get a larger piece of the school budget if they reach them. So it's directly relevant to the best interest of the school, the child, the teacher, the principal. And again, in the more negative scenario, our homicide rates are so high that anything we do in Jamaica and programming with partners and sustaining is to reduce homicide. Jamaica's homicide rate this year will hit 1,000. That's over 3 times greater than the city of Chicago's, which is the homicide capital of the U.S. And it's 4 times bigger than Jamaica population-wise. So any decrease in reduced homicide, I mean, it's so obvious to all of us here, that's a big win. Every homicide affects children's lives. So even just getting a decrease in homicides, we're very happy.
But could somebody take your program and do it in Chicago?
Absolutely.
So are they?
Well, I don't want to get into Chicago's school system. There are Chicagoans here who know a little more about it than I do. But yes, I think definitely. Because I think, again, what we're looking at is something the school measures, and that's something that a small intervention like getting a kid on the street into a coaching position can get those numbers up.
Right.
And the important thing is the homicide's the negative one. The positive one is get attendance, performance, and better behavior.
Literacy, numeracy, all those
Everything
things,
looks good. Everyone gets rewarded.
Because, I mean, the thing that really interests me is, you talk about a program that, it's not rocket science. It's easy to understand. It's easy to understand why it works. So, the question I always have when I talk to someone like you is, well, why aren't all the schools plagued with violence doing this? How do we get these ideas to spread? You spent most of your life working in public health, right?
Yes.
How do we create a kind of epidemic effect for these good ideas?
The unfortunate part of that analysis is that violence, homicide in particular, behaves like a contagious disease. It is rocket science to reduce homicide by large numbers. There are too many variables that a school can't control, that a donor can't control, that a community can't control. And that's what the challenge is. You have to map out, again, in the extreme case of homicide, Chicago or Kingston, where the murders take place, what time they take place. And when you do that, it looks exactly like an infectious disease. 80% of homicide in Kingston happens between midnight Friday and sunrise Sunday. Yeah. Where? I can show you the 20 places on the map. For how long? For the past 20 years. As predictable as the rain in London. Yeah. So the trick is taking that scientific piece and translating it into commitment and action. But as I say, violence is very hard to control.
But the other thing is, how do you make beyond sport behave like a contagious disease, isn't it? I mean, isn't that what we're all kind of trying to do here which is to infect each other with great ideas so that they really spread and multiply.
I think I was actually going to say something very similar to that. It's each year I have an opportunity, twice a year, to gather with my counterparts from the other 31 NFL clubs. And those days are some of the most enriching of my entire year because I hear what my counterparts are doing in their clubs, what's working and what isn't working. I feel the same way about Beyond Sport. I feel like Nick planted me here now. But but it's these conversations. I mean, it's great to sit here and listen to us, of course, I think. We're fabulously entertaining. But beyond that, the conversations I've had with so many of you in this room, as I'm looking out, I'm thinking about the different stories. And when I saw that I was on the panel with you, I thought back to the conversation we had on the first night about the challenges that we had in Jamaica. And I thought about the translatability to my own location in San Francisco. But those conversations are the start of something. It's really the recording of all of these conversations that enables others to learn from beyond this room. And I know they're videoing this.
Right.
I hope that gets out. But there's so much that's translatable.
Right.
For all of us. I mean, you asked me earlier, and how do you think about programming? How do you develop programming? And I think my response to you was, you get down into the trenches and you start asking those questions, and you find out what's needed in that exact community. But you don't know what to recommend if you've only learned your own community, because then you have that myopic view of what's happening in your postal code. But once you get outside of that and you learn about these other programs and other efforts and the efficacy of them, then you're able to figure out how to implement them in your own place.
This will get more contagious if we have more young people every time we meet.
Well, I was going to say, so Louis, have you had an opportunity to work with or talk to people from other football clubs, for example?
Have I here?
Yeah.
Have I?
Here or at any point in the time that you've been working?
Like with the Kicks program that I was part of as a young person, and for a couple of years as an apprentice with Portsmouth Football Club, we went to a lot of national tournaments around the country. So I was always conversing with young people and staff from all different clubs from around the UK. In the last couple of years, sort of taken a little dip because the Kicks project, I'm not working on it personally. So the tournaments I'm not attending, and I'm not conversing with the coaches. But the coaches that my colleague had partnership with whilst I was a young person, we still have connections with, and we're always in talks with them coming down to us going to them to arrange football tournaments to break down rivalry barriers between clubs.
Right. I mean, one of the things that always strikes me when I hear about projects like this is everybody kind of likes to invent their own. Yeah. But sometimes, it's just incredibly smart to steal. Yeah. That actually when you see something working, just see if it'll work for you, because it could be a lot faster and you get all the benefits of everybody else's mistakes, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. In terms of the projects that you're supporting, are these projects that you're developing, or people come to you for the funding of those projects?
The big projects are already sort of kick-started, often by the clubs. And I think the point I'd like to make is that I don't believe in a reliance on big government to support many of the type of projects which have been talked about at this conference. I think the most effective projects which I've seen are a combination of, and they can be government, but they can also get involved with a lot of local funding and a lot of corporate funding. If you simply rely on government to put money in, you can get stuck in this cycle of constantly applying for funding, which we've talked about, and it becomes, and government has limited funding. Budgets are squeezed, budgets are diverted, economic situations change. And although that can be the case with corporates as well, there's been a lot of corporate sponsorship of sport which has been long-lasting, has gone on for many, many years, and won't necessarily be short-term. In fact, it's not a good thing for corporate to get involved in short-term sponsorship. It's actually, exactly, it's actually quite bad for your brand, because it looks like you're a sort of a flavour of the month, are here today, gone tomorrow. Barclays sponsoring the Premiership is a good example. Mm-hmm. They've been with it for a long time, and that's worked, I'm sure, very effectively for them. Lycamobile is relatively new into sponsorship. We've been with West Ham, for example, in our 4th season, but we didn't know they were going to the Olympic Stadium when we started with West Ham. We're now going through into the Olympic Stadium, which is a bit of serendipity for us, but that shows one of the benefits that can come back to you. And we believe that's going to be a fantastic platform for us on a number of different areas, and we hope to progress our relationship with them over the long term. Chance to Shine is another very interesting one. Started off as a little hobby horse of the Governor of the Bank of England, but he's actually drawn in a huge amount of business into it and a huge amount of local communities as well. So all these things end up being local. They end up in Jamaica, in Portsmouth, in San Francisco, in East London, in South London, and so on. So you've got to get that kind of local support. You've got to get local communities, parental support. And I think businesses which have, I believe, an enlightened self-interest to have a significant role to play in helping to project these projects forward in the long term.
Yeah, and I think in the long term is really the heart of the matter, isn't it? That these projects get better and better, they get more and more credibility, they get more traction with the community to the degree that people are really in it for the long term.